Now we've collected a few questions. I'll come around and see if there's some more. And Shawneen will take over and introduce our panelists. Ms. Permar.
Hi. I've had the great good pleasure of working with Jack for about a year, working on what we're doing here today. And almost exactly 8 months ago, tomorrow as a matter of fact, at a meeting of the Environmental Science Committee, we were talking about the environmental assessment done by the Kuwaitis, and John Labriola asked a really good question. He said, well, when the Kuwaitis commissioned this study, what was their intention? What were they going to do with it? And Jim Jordan said, you really ought to ask Mr. Brumley about that. Then a couple months later, we went up to Columbia to meet with John Mark Dean, and we said, well, this assessment that you all did is really interesting, but did the Kuwaitis really use it when they were developing the island? Did they really take it into consideration? And John Mark said, you really ought to ask Frank Brumley about that. A couple months ago, we met with Mark Permar, and we talked to Mark about the assessment and the master plan and how the island was developed. And we said, well, did the Kuwaitis really take that environmental assessment into consideration when they were doing the master plan? And Mark Permar said, you really ought to ask Frank Brumley about that. So Jack and I walked outside after our meeting with Mark, and we were on the sidewalk, and I turned to Jack and said, we probably ought to call Frank Brumley. And Jack said, you think? So we did. Not only did we call him, but he answered. He met with us, regaled us with wonderful stories, shared so much of his experience, and agreed to be here with us today. Well, at this point, you probably realize that Frank Brumley needs no introduction, which is why I get to do it. And I thought about, well, what can I say about Frank? What can I talk about? What can I tell you about him? And I thought, well, I'll just introduce Frank by saying Frank Brumley is the missing link. Well, no, that didn't seem like the appropriate term for Frank. But from our perspective, he was the person that could connect the dots between the environmental assessment that the Kuwaitis commissioned and that you heard so much about, and the development of the island itself. How did the two go together? Did they go together? Was it an easy transition from recommendations to the planning stage? And Frank was here from the very beginning. We spent 4 years, from 1974 to 1978, as head of the development, 4 trips to Kuwait, worked with the Kuwaitis, and we just could not wait to have him here today. So we've asked him if he would say a little bit for us and then join John, Mark, and Mark on the panel. We're going to take your questions. We've asked you to write them down. People are walking up and down, collecting questions. I have a few here already, and hopefully they're going to also ask each other some questions. So, Frank Brumley.
Great.
Thank you, Shawnee. First thing I want to do is introduce my wife of 52 years, Blanche. So stand up. You can do the math from when we came here. We're in our early 70s now. We were in our early 30s when we came here to get this started. And I find more and more I need Blanche to help tell the story because I can't remember a lot of it that happened as it was supposed to. Blanche, the other claim to fame, and some of you may have these, but this is the Diary of a Kiawah Pioneer that has Blanche and I and our 3 girls who were 6, 8, and 10 at the time on the front. This was a marketing piece that was done with Mark's wife Diana and David Rawl, who's a Charleston marketing guy, and they put this piece together, and it's a kind of a walk through an early trip through, and Shanine's going to use portions of it in the Kiawah magazine as she goes along. But it was, if you Google Blanche Brumley, she's an author, and you'll find this Diary of a Kiawah Pioneer. And you can tell it's a marketing piece when you read the whole thing, and it's got all the bird life and wildlife and how to catch crabs and how to cook them. But the telling tale is, you can tell it's a marketing piece. The last paragraph says, hopefully this answers some of your questions about the island, and maybe even encourage you to ask some more. We hope so. And if you do want to know more about Kiawah, ask my husband, Frank Brumley. He's the Vice President, General Manager of the Kiawah Beach Company. So Ogilvy and Mather, actually from New York, were our marketing consultants at Seapines and help us do all this kind of stuff. So we've given this to one to Charlie. She's going to enjoy using it. But just a little bit of background. I went to work for Charles Frazier in 1969. Harbortown was under construction. And our first job was involved, Charles had bought 3,000 acres on Cumberland Island, that all of you know now is a National Seashore Park, where Charles, having developed Hilton Head, or the Seapines Plantation part of it, thought that was a good idea, and we attempted it for a while, and the environmental situation just wasn't appropriate, so we sold it to the National Park Service and bought Amelia Island. And Blanche and I moved there with our 3 little girls in 1970, and I was the original CEO for the Amelia Island development, and believe it or not, our master planner was Ian McCarr, Designed with Nature. So I got an early exposure to that, but Charles Frazier was really the backbone of this whole concept and what happened. He was a law school graduate at the University of Georgia and Yale. He really improvised, designed, came up with the whole restrictive covenant process of how you protect a piece of property. It really wasn't done in this country before. And Charles really came up with it, developed it, and to this day, in current developments, basically are still using those conservation outlines and platforms, and as Mark knows, it's we have quite a fraternity of us that worked for Charles over the years and have a tremendous amount of respect for him. But we were at Amelia Island for 4 years, and we get a call one day, and Charles says, Frank, the Kuwait Investment Company has purchased Kiawah. Would you and Blanche have an interest in moving to Charleston? Well, we had, as I mentioned, our 3 little girls were 4, 6, and 8 at the time, and we thought if we visited Charleston, knew what a wonderful place it was, and said, well, great, we'd love to do it. So we came to Charleston, and Charles said, I want you to live downtown and get to know the people in the city and have an office down there. So we ended up with where the Kiawah River Golf Course is over on Betsy Carson. That was our camp to start with. We had 4 double-wide trailers over there. And the Seapines planning team, a fellow named Rob Hall and a guy named Fred Novak, were the planners. And then we brought up a whole series of architects and engineers. And we worked from that camp for 2 years while the property was being rezoned, planned in the early stages, and then we, which was tumultuous. I always used to carry Blanche with me to zoning meetings. We had a lot of opposition because of the Arab ownership. The Jewish community was very much against the Kuwaitis at the time were funding the PLO. There's a lot of hard feelings about it, and the environmental community. This was pre-Dana Beach, who's a good friend of mine. But there were a pretty strong environmental group that really didn't want to see Kiawah develop. So it was an adversarial group that basically opposed the rezoning of it. We accomplished it and opened the inn in 1976. And as Mark said earlier, Shawneen said, I was here from 74 to 78. I'll tell you, the Kuwait Investment Company were not the easiest group of people to work for. And so we ended up basically at a stalemate after 4 years. And I went into business in Charleston and had a commercial real estate business, but everybody eventually that came to look at Kiawah would end up, and Pat McKinney was my partner, my sales manager out here, had been at Seapines with me. And he and I were involved in business together. Everybody would end up at our office and say, you know, what do you think about Kiawah? Is it still viable as a development? They said, we know that the 2 of you guys know where all the skeletons are buried. And we, after a while, we figured out we still had the shovels, and we probably should try to be involved. So in 1988, Pat and I and John Rivers, who was the local CBS affiliate, and his brother-in-law, Bronson Ingram, many of you know Martha Ingram, who's from Nashville and quite a philanthropist and the driving force behind the new Gale Yard. Her husband, Bronson, we acquired an option to purchase Kiawah for $100 million. This was 1988. And we had 90 days to make it happen, and we didn't. And so when the option was dropped, Charlie Wade called one day and said, "Frank, are you and Pat interested in joining my group to purchase Kiawah?" So we did in 1988 for $105 million. We borrowed all that money from forerunner of Bank of America, who was National Bank, was NCNB, North Carolina National Bank at the time. And you maybe know Charlie Wade, he has this great big booming voice, and he would call Pat and me, who were responsible for running things and getting the property sold. He would call at 7:30 in the morning on the house phone and say, "Frank, do you realize the interest today is $38,000. I said, "What the hell are you and Pat doing still at home? You know, you ought to be out selling something." So the first thing we did was obviously did the surf song development. Was a couple miles of beachfront that was already basically well served, and we did it and got things rolling and created the dollars to pay off a lot of that debt, and the rest is kind of history. I sold my interest in Kiawah in 1997. When Charlie Wade was getting out, and I was focused on Daniel Island at the time, and it was a conflict of interest to a degree for me. So we ended up, I sold my interest when Charlie did, and when Morgan Stanley got out. Then my brother and I bought Daniel Island from the Guggenheim family in 1997. And so we've been well underway developing that for the last 16 years. And it's interesting, it's a totally different than Kiawah, but many of the same basics in good land plan. We used Cooper Robertson from New York, who's Jack Robertson is the Dean of the School of Architecture at UVA. Used all the same land protection covenants that were used and developed and originated by Charles Fraser. We've got a lot we've got a lot more density. We have 11,000 people living on Daniel Island, and we'll be through there in 2020. So it's been great timing, and a great first 10 years. We had some great timing here at Kiawah in the years we were involved. I'll tell you two funny stories. When one of the early ones talking about the hogs on the island, we had a real problem. We were building the first golf course with the feral hogs rooting up the golf course. It was under construction. You come out the next morning, they'd be on the greens and been tearing it up. So in addition to traps, which weren't very successful, each of us on the development team carried a rifle and in the Jeep with us, and our job was to shoot the hogs. And so I was, Blanche and I were out one day, late afternoon. I was on my way back home to a dinner party, and I looked off through the woods right over next to the Van Drost house, next to one of the pens, and there was this great big hog standing near the pen. So I had a scope on the rifle, so I shot the pig, dropped him in his tracks, and picked up the phone. And maybe you know MC Haywood. He was our first employee out here. He's the guy who does the oyster roast at Mingo Point. Well, he was our literally first employee. So Blanche and I were driving on our way back to town, and I called MC and said, MC, I just shot a big hog that's up next to the pen in front of the Van Drost house. Go get it and share it with your friends on John's Island. And there was this pregnant silence on the other end of the phone. He said, Mr. Brumley, you killed the wrong hog. And I said, MC, what could you possibly mean? There's no such thing as a wrong pig on Kiawah. And he said, well, actually, we borrowed that hog from the farmer on John's Island. He was tied to the pen. Actually, it was a female hog that was bait to draw in another hog. So it took me a long time to live that one. Great white hunter, I killed the bait. One last quick anecdote I'll tell you, because it's interesting about Jim Jordan. He called one day and said, Mr. Brumley, you've got one of our bobcats on your property on Wadmalaw. We've got a farm out on North Edisto at the end of Bears Bluff Road, and Jack kindly referred to it as a plantation before. It's a farm. It really is a farm. But it's got great views, and we're right up the North Edisto River from behind DeVoe Bank, and a lot of wildlife. And so Jim said, we've got this collared cat, and we're following it with GPS, and it's on your property. And do you mind if we come see it and count the kittens and take a look at it and try to retrieve the collar? And I said, I'd known Jim, we'd met years ago, I hadn't seen him recently. I said, well, on one condition, you can come to the property, I'll beat you up the gate, let you in. And he said, well, what's the condition? I said, well, you've got to take me with you to find the bobcat, because I really want to see it myself. A couple of people had seen the cat with the collar on the island. So they brought the antennas and the jeeps, and we circled. The second trip, found the cat. And as Jim does, and I'm sure you followed it, he has the ability to drop the collar with a little detonator. So he got his computer out and dropped it. We never saw the cat, but he went and got to retrieve the collar, which I understand is very expensive, and sent it back to have new batteries put in it. But so anyway, that cat, very healthily, it made it all the way across Bohicket and Leadenwall and our property, which is probably 8 miles from here as the crow flies. And about 3 months later, I saw a female cat with 3 kittens. Don't know if it was the same cat or not, but it was in the same general area. So the Kiawah bobcat population is alive and well and well traveled. But I'm delighted to be here. Love Kiawah, Blanche, and our club members, and don't spend a lot of time here. We have our large family. Our 3 girls are now 46, 48, 50, and have presented us with 8 wonderful grandchildren from 12 to 24, and we spend a lot of time with them, and doesn't leave us much time to come to Kiawah as we'd like, but we do come frequently and have great friends with Mark and Diana. And Jimmy Bailey, who spoke earlier, worked for us at Daniel Island until Kiawah stole him away, and we miss him. He did a good job for us. But I'll be glad to be a part of the panel and answer any questions.